Good to be with you again as we continue in the book of 2 Samuel, where King David's rule, anchored by God's promises of blessing and an enduring dynasty in chapter 7, is now facing pressures from within. This, of course, is as a result of David's sin. When he committed adultery with Bathsheba and murdered her husband Uriah, God said that the sword would never depart from David's house and that out of his own household God would bring calamity. And so it began in chapters 13 and 14. David's firstborn son Amnon rapes his sister Tamar, and then in revenge younger brother Absalom kills Amnon, which just might be a play for succession rights to David's throne. Absalom then flees into exile, fearing reprisals for murdering the heir apparent. But in time, David opens a way for Absalom's safe return to Jerusalem, although he's not yet welcomed back into the royal court. And so Absalom is back in town, but the stigma of murdering his older brother remains. Let's see what happens next in chapter 15. In the course of time, Absalom provided himself with a chariot and horses and with 50 men to run ahead of him. He would get up early and stand by the side of the road leading to the city gate. Whenever anyone came with a complaint to be placed before the king for a decision, Absalom would call out to him, "What town are you from?" He'd answer, "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your claims are valid and proper, but there is no representative of the king to hear you." And Absalom would add, "If only I were appointed judge in the land. Then everyone who has a complaint or a case could come to me, and I would see that they receive justice." Also, whenever anyone approached him to bow down before him, Absalom would reach out his hand, take hold of him and kiss him. Absalom behaved in this way toward all the Israelites who came to the king asking for justice. And so he stole the hearts of the people of Israel. So Absalom goes on a 4-year-long charm offensive, which also has the effect of undermining the rule of David. For his part, David does nothing to stop him. We notice a pattern there, right? Over time, the tide of public opinion swells behind Absalom, who then launches a coup. David learns that the hearts of the people are with Absalom, and so he and his household flee for their lives. The palace is deserted, except for some caretaker concubines, while David endures the shame of leaving his own fortress city in fear of his own son. It seems a tragic and shameful end to David's rule. As his extended family process hurriedly out of Jerusalem, David is met by various people who either join him or offer him support. One of those is Zadok the priest, who brings with him the Ark of the Covenant. But David sends him back, saying, "Take the Ark of God back into the city. If I find favour in the Lord's eyes, he will bring me back and let me see it and his dwelling place again. But if he says, 'I am not pleased with you,' then I am ready. Let him do to me whatever seems good to him." The king also said to Zadok the priest, "Do you understand? Go back to the city with my blessing. Take your son Ahimaaz with you, and also Abiathar's son Jonathan. You and Abiathar return with your 2 sons. I will wait at the fords in the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me." So Zadok and Abiathar took the Ark of God back to Jerusalem and stayed there. Okay, 2 things to notice here. First, David does not see the Ark of the Covenant as a kind of power object, a religious talisman that will make him invincible. David knows the Ark and the covenant it represents belongs not to the king, but to all God's people. Power does not rest with the Ark, but in God, whose presence is mediated by it. The second important observation here is that even as David is fleeing Jerusalem in fear, he's already making plans for overthrowing Absalom and returning to reclaim the throne. He plants Zadok and Abiathar, the priests, as spies within the city. Later, he will also plant one of his aged wise men within Absalom's court to frustrate the advice given to him. But what's the key? It is God himself who will determine David's future. Only God himself will bring him back to see Jerusalem again, and it is this trust in God and dependence on him for any future vindication that marks David's retreat. Now, this becomes especially apparent when Shimei, a relative of former King Saul, begins to taunt and throw curses at David and his family, even in the midst of their shame and humiliation. David's guards and General Abishai want to retaliate and kill Shimei, but David is resolved to trust only in God's vindication. So in verse 11 of chapter 16 we read, David then said to Abishai and his officials, "My son, my own flesh and blood is trying to kill me. How much more then this Benjamite?" Remember, Saul is from the tribe of Benjamin. David says, "Leave him alone. Let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. It may be that the Lord will look upon my misery and restore to me his covenant blessing instead of this curse today." David's position is clear. Only God can rescue him from his son. As Absalom's coup progresses, he'll surely seek to kill David, and likely all others of his supporters and potential rivals for the throne as well. So where is David's security and his deliverance? Well, it's in God alone. Only God can put things right to restore covenant blessing instead of the curses he is now experiencing. This vindication can come only from God. As Christians, we reflect back on King David as a type of Christ, a preparation and a foreshadowing of the true king. And David's experiences and his responses to them and his interaction with God create an expectation, a paradigm, if you will, which Jesus will fill out and breathe life into. Not everything David does contributes to this type, but perhaps there's something for us here to consider. You see, when we see Jesus betrayed by one of the 12, one who should have been one of his greatest supporters, we realise that David's experience of betrayal by Absalom was preparing us for this. When Jesus goes to the cross and he is taunted and insulted and mocked, we understand his restraint because David has prepared us. When Jesus faces a humiliating and unjust death, he entrusts himself entirely to God for his rescue, unexpected and beyond mere human intervention. We understand all this because, as David was a type of the promised Messiah working from the lesser to the greater, we recognise the same pattern. God will rescue and deliver his chosen, even in the face of death, and prove him to be his chosen king forever. Now, David's psalms, written in such circumstances, give us an insight not only into the mind of David, but also into the mind of Christ as he faced death. And so, Psalm 3, a psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom. "Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. But you, Lord, are a shield around me, my glory, the one who lifts my head high. I call out to the Lord, and he answers me from his holy mountain. I lie down and sleep. I wake again because the Lord sustains me. I will not fear, though tens of thousands assail me on every side. Arise, Lord, deliver me, my God. Strike all my enemies on the jaw, break the teeth of the wicked. From the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be upon your people."